Enjoying your $500,000 trust fund? That was what my sister asked me, smiling into her wine glass like she just complimented my shoes. The room went quiet in that way it does when something important has been said, even if no one else realizes it yet. I remember the hum of the refrigerator behind me, the soft clink of ice settling in my glass, the smell of rosemary chicken still hanging in the air. I remember blinking at her once, then twice, trying to decide if she was joking. "What trust fund?" I asked. She laughed, a short, surprised laugh. "Don't play with me," she said. "Daddy set it up years ago. $500,000. You should be getting the final distribution soon." My fork slipped from my fingers and hit the plate with a sound that felt too loud for the moment. I didn't pick it up. I just stared at her, my older sister, sitting there in her tailored blouse and diamond earrings, looking at me like I was being difficult on purpose. "I don't have a trust fund," I said. My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. Her smile faded, slowly, carefully, like she was backing away from something sharp. "Yes, you do," she said. "You always did." That was the moment something cracked open in my life, not loudly, not all at once, just a thin fracture that ran through everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and the man who raised us. Before that night, my life was small in the best way, predictable, manageable. I lived in a 2-bedroom house that creaked when the weather changed. The paint on the porch was peeling and the third step always wobbled, but it was mine. I worked as an office administrator at a dental clinic. Nothing fancy, but steady. I packed my lunch most days, leftovers wrapped in foil, apples bruised from sitting in my bag too long. I was the younger sister, always had been, the one who borrowed clothes instead of buying new ones, the one who learned early how to stretch a dollar and smile through it. My sister, Elaine, had been different. She was born with a kind of confidence that made people step aside for her without realizing they were doing it. Teachers loved her, bosses noticed her, men listened when she spoke. Growing up, it was understood, never said outright, but understood, that Elaine would go far. I would go somewhere else. Our father used to say he loved us equally, and I believed him. I really did. He showed up to my school plays, even when I only had one line. He taught me how to balance a checkbook at the kitchen table, tapping the pencil against the page and telling me security matters more than sparkle. Elaine got the sparkle anyway. After Mom died, things changed in ways I didn't have words for back then. Elaine left for college in another state. I stayed close to home. Dad and I fell into a quiet rhythm. Sunday grocery trips, dinners eaten in front of the television, the same jokes told again and again. He never talked about money except to warn me about debt. He never mentioned investments or trusts or anything that sounded like inheritance. When he passed, 10 years ago now, there was a will. Simple, clean, everything divided evenly, the lawyer said. She got the lake house. I got the family home minus the mortgage. She said it was fair. She said she didn't want the old place anyway, too many memories. I thanked her. I meant it. We didn't talk much after that. Holidays, birthdays, the occasional text. She was busy. I understood. So when she invited me to dinner that night, I was touched. Nervous, too. I ironed my blouse. I brought a bottle of wine I couldn't really afford. I told myself it was just sisters catching up. I didn't know I was walking into a question that would undo me. After she said it, after the trust fund words were out in the air, I excused myself to the bathroom. I locked the door and leaned against it, my hands shaking. I stared at my face in the mirror. I looked the same. Tired eyes, a crease between my brows I didn't remember earning. I ran cold water over my wrists, tried to breathe. A trust fund meant planning. It meant intention. It meant my father had made a choice somewhere along the way, a choice he never told me about, a choice that somehow never reached me. When I went back out, Elaine was on her phone, her expression tight. She looked up like she was seeing me for the first time. "You really didn't know," she said. I shook my head. She frowned. "That's strange." Strange was the word she chose. Not wrong, not unfair, just strange. We finished dinner in silence. She hugged me at the door, stiff and distracted like her mind was already somewhere else. I drove home with the radio off, the streetlights blurring past, my thoughts looping the same question over and over. If there was a trust fund, where was it? That night I lay in bed listening to the house settle around me, every pop and creak suddenly unfamiliar. I thought about my father's hands, always careful, always steady. I thought about the way he used to say my name when he was proud of me. And for the first time since he died, I wondered if there were things he never meant for me to see. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I drifted in and out, the way you do when your mind refuses to rest, when every time your eyes close, a new question floats up like a ghost. The clock on my nightstand glowed 2:14, then 3:47, then 5:02. Somewhere around dawn, a bird started singing outside my window, cheerful and unaware, and I felt a sharp, unreasonable anger toward it. By morning, my head ached. I made coffee I didn't drink and toast I forgot about until the smell of burning filled the kitchen. I scraped the blackened bread into the trash and stood there for a long moment, staring into the empty can like it might answer me. "A trust fund," Elaine's voice kept replaying in my head, casual, almost amused. "Enjoying your $500,000 trust fund?" She'd said it like it was a given, like she was asking if I'd liked a movie we'd both seen. I called the dental office and told them I was taking a personal day. My supervisor didn't ask questions. She just said, "Take care," and that way people do when they think they understand, even if they don't. I started with the obvious. I pulled out the old metal file box from the hall closet, the one with the bent latch and the faded label that said "Important." Inside were birth certificates, tax returns, insurance papers, the will. I spread them across the dining table, smoothing each page with my palm, reading dates and names like I was looking for a hidden message. There was nothing. No mention of a trust, no bank statements I didn't recognize, just the life I'd always known, neatly documented and painfully ordinary. By late morning, I gave in and called Elaine. She answered on the third ring. "I was hoping you'd call." "I need you to tell me exactly what you know," I said. I tried to keep my voice calm, but it trembled anyway. "Not what you assume, what you actually know." There was a pause. I could hear the faint echo of her footsteps, the click of heels on tile. "Dad told me about it when Mom died. He said he'd set aside money for you, something extra, because you were staying, because you were taking on more." Taking on more. That was how he put it. "Did he say where it was?" I asked. "He said it was in trust, managed by a financial advisor. He said you'd get access when you turned 50. I sank into the chair. 50? I was 52. "Why didn't you ever mention this before?" I asked. She sighed. "I thought you knew, and after Dad passed, it didn't seem like my place. I mean, you got the house, I got the lake place. Everything else was split. I assumed the trust was already taken care of." I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. Instead, I said, "Do you know the advisor's name?" Another pause, longer this time. "I might," she said. "I'd have to check old emails." "Please," I said. The word came out smaller than I intended. "I'll look," she promised. When we hung up, the house felt too quiet. I paced from room to room, touching familiar things, the worn arm of the couch, the picture frame on the wall where Dad stood behind us, his hands on our shoulders, Elaine smiling bright and sure, me half hidden beside her. By the afternoon, my nerves were shot. Every sound made me jump. When the phone finally rang, I grabbed it so fast I nearly dropped it. "I found something," Elaine said. "An email from a man named Richard Halpern, Financial Management. It's from, wow, 15 years ago." My stomach tightened. "Can you forward it?" "Already did." I opened my laptop with shaking hands and pulled up my email. There it was, a forwarded message, brief and formal, talking about trust arrangements and long-term planning. My name was there, in black and white. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. "Why would Dad do this and not tell me?" I whispered. "I don't know," Elaine said, softer now. "Maybe he wanted it to be a surprise. Or maybe he thought I wouldn't ask." I wrote to the email address listed, half expecting it to bounce back. It didn't. An hour later, a reply came. "Yes, I remember your father. I would be happy to discuss the trust. Please call my office to set an appointment." I read it 3 times, my heart pounding. The next week crawled by. At work, I smiled and answered phones and scheduled cleanings like nothing was wrong. At night, I lay awake imagining what $500,000 could have meant for me, paying off the house, fixing the roof, maybe for once not worrying. When the day of the appointment came, I dressed carefully, nothing fancy, just clean and pressed. I drove across town to an office building with reflective windows and a lobby that smelled faintly of lemon polish. The receptionist smiled politely and asked me to have a seat. While I waited, I studied the people around me, men in suits, women with leather bags and confident posture. I felt out of place, like I'd wandered into the wrong story. When Richard Halpern finally called my name, he was older than I expected, gray hair, kind eyes. He shook my hand firmly and led me into his office. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Your father was a careful man." I swallowed. "He had a trust for me. I never knew about it." His expression flickered, just for a second. "Enough." "Yes, he did," he said slowly. And?" I prompted. He folded his hands on the desk. "There's something you need to understand," he said. "The trust was established, funded, but—" "But what?" I asked. He hesitated, then said the words that made my ears ring. "But it was accessed years ago." "Accessed?" I repeated. "By who?" Richard looked at me, his face heavy with something that looked like regret. "By your sister," he said. For a moment, I didn't understand what he was saying. The words were familiar. I knew each one on its own. Accessed, years ago, by your sister, but together they didn't make sense. They slid off my mind like water on glass. "I'm sorry," I said. "I think I misheard you." Richard didn't move. He just held my gaze, steady and uncomfortable, like a doctor waiting for a patient to catch up to a diagnosis. "The trust was accessed," he repeated gently. "Your sister was listed as a secondary trustee. She had limited authority, but under certain conditions, she could withdraw funds." My mouth felt dry. "What conditions?" He reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder, thick. He placed it on the desk between us and opened it slowly, as if he were trying not to startle me. "Medical hardship," he said. "Emergency family support. Those were the terms your father approved." I laughed then, a short, sharp sound that surprised even me. "Elaine was never in medical hardship." Richard nodded. "Not in the way you're thinking. The documentation cited stress-related illness, anxiety, depression." I stared at the papers, signatures, dates, amounts, large amounts. "Are you telling me she lied?" I asked. "I'm telling you the withdrawals were approved based on the information provided at the time," he said carefully, "and that over the course of 7 years, the trust was depleted." Depleted. I pressed my hands flat against my thighs to keep them from shaking. "How much is left?" He closed the folder. "There is no balance remaining." The room went silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. I could hear my own breathing, uneven and too loud. I said, "She took it all." Richard didn't argue. I drove home in a fog. I don't remember the traffic lights or the turns. I only remember pulling into my driveway and sitting there long after the engine was off, staring at the front door like it belonged to someone else. Inside, the house smelled like dust and old wood, comforting usually. That day, it felt fragile, temporary. I sank onto the couch and let the truth settle into me, heavy and unwelcome. My sister, the one person I trusted without reservation, had known, not just about the trust, but about my ignorance of it. She'd sat across from me at dinner, watched my face crumble, and still called it strange. That night, I didn't call her. I didn't confront her. I did something quieter and maybe more dangerous. I started digging. I requested copies of every document Richard could legally provide. I spread them across my dining table, the same way I had with Dad's papers, but this time the story they told was different. Withdrawals timed with Elaine's life events, the year she bought her first condo, the year she started her business, the year she renovated the lake house. She hadn't taken the money all at once, she'd taken it carefully, thoughtfully, like someone who expected never to be questioned. I thought about every time she'd complained about being stretched thin, every time she'd hinted that Dad favored me because I stayed close. All those conversations rearranged themselves in my mind, taking on new meaning. 3 days later, I called her. She answered with forced cheer. "Hey, little sis." I asked, "Did you take my trust fund?" Silence. Not the confused kind, not the offended kind, the kind that stretches just long enough to be an answer. "I didn't take your money," she said finally. "I took family money." I closed my eyes. Dad set that aside for me. "He set it aside because he felt guilty," she snapped, "because you gave up opportunities to stay with him. I needed help too." "You needed $500,000? I asked. "You don't know what my life was like." Her voice was sharp now, defensive. The pressure, the expectations. Everyone thought I had it easy. I didn't. I pictured her office, her car, the vacations she'd posted online. "I could have told me," I said. "And what? Watched you judge me? Watched you act like the martyr?" That hurt more than I expected. "I never asked for that money," I said. "I didn't even know it existed." "That's not my fault," she replied. "Dad should have told you." We went in circles after that. Blame passed back and forth like something too hot to hold. She insisted she'd meant to pay it back someday. I asked when. She didn't answer. When the call ended, I felt hollowed out. Not angry, not yet, just tired in a way sleep wouldn't fix. For days, I walked through my routines like a ghost. At work, I smiled. At home, I sat in the quiet and listened to the clock tick. Every tick felt like time I'd already lost. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. Not from Elaine, from the bank. It was a notice, formal, polite, informing me that a lien had been placed on my house. I read it twice before the words made sense. The house, the one thing I thought was safe. According to the letter, the trust had been used as collateral for a loan Elaine had defaulted on. My knees gave out. I slid down the wall and sat on the floor, the paper crumpled in my hand. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about my home. I sat on that floor for a long time. The letter lay open in my lap, its edges trembling with my hands. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked. Life continued at its normal pace while mine narrowed to a single piece of paper and the quiet realization that my sister hadn't just taken what my father left me, she'd put a hand around the throat of the life I'd built and squeezed. When I finally stood, my legs felt weak, like they belonged to someone older. I placed the letter on the kitchen counter and stared at it as if looking away might make it disappear. I called the number listed at the bottom. After navigating a maze of automated prompts, I reached a woman with a calm, practiced voice. She explained the situation as if she were talking about the weather. Yes, the trust had been listed as collateral. Yes, the lien was legal. No, they hadn't been able to reach me before because the correspondence had gone to the address on file. Elaine's address. "I didn't authorize this," I said. "I understand," the woman replied, "but the documentation shows your sister acting as trustee under powers granted at the time." "When will you take my house?" I asked. There was a pause. If the loan remains unpaid, foreclosure proceedings could begin within 6 months. 6 months. I thanked her because that's what I do when I'm overwhelmed. I become polite. Then I hung up and leaned against the counter, my forehead resting on the cool surface. That night, I didn't cry. I cleaned. I scrubbed the bathroom grout with a toothbrush. I reorganized the pantry. I needed to move, to do something physical, because if I sat still, I was afraid I'd come apart. The next morning, I called a lawyer. His office was small and smelled faintly of old books and burnt coffee. He listened without interrupting, his pen moving steadily across his notepad as I told him everything, from the dinner conversation to the trust to the lien on my house. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Your sister abused her authority," he said. "There's no question of that." "Can I get the money back?" I asked. He hesitated. "Possibly, but it won't be simple and it won't be quick." "What about my house?" "That," he said, "is what we focus on first." We filed paperwork, emergency motions, requests for injunction, words that felt heavy and unfamiliar in my mouth. I signed my name over and over until it stopped feeling like mine. When Elaine found out, she called me in a fury. "You're really doing this?" she demanded. "You're suing me?" "I'm protecting myself," I said. "You left me no choice." "You're tearing this family apart," she said. I almost laughed. "You did that when you decided I didn't need to know the truth." She accused me of being ungrateful, of forgetting everything she'd ever done for me. I let her talk until her anger burned itself out. "I loved you," I said quietly when she finally paused. "I trusted you." She hung up on me. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Letters arrived from lawyers, emails filled my inbox. Every day brought a new reminder of how close I was to losing everything. At night, I dreamed of my father. He stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. I tried to ask him why. He never answered. The first court hearing was held in a room that felt too bright and too cold. Elaine sat across from me, her posture stiff, her face carefully composed. She didn't look at me. When the judge spoke, his voice was calm, measured. He granted a temporary injunction halting foreclosure proceedings until the case could be resolved. I felt a small, shaky relief, but it was laced with sadness. This is where we were now, strangers deciding what my family had broken. After the hearing, Elaine followed me into the hallway. "You're embarrassing me," she hissed. "You embarrassed yourself," I replied. She shook her head, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Dad would be ashamed." That was the moment my anger finally found its voice. "Dad trusted you, and you used that trust to steal from me. Don't tell me what he'd think." She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. Months passed. Evidence piled up. Bank statements, emails, testimony from Richard. The truth became impossible to ignore. The judge ruled that Elaine had acted in bad faith. The trust withdrawals were deemed improper. The lien on my house was removed. I won, but winning didn't feel like I thought it would. Elaine was ordered to repay a portion of the funds. Not all, she'd already spent too much. The lake house was sold to cover part of the debt. Her business closed soon after. The day the ruling came down, I sat alone in my car and cried. Not from relief, from grief, because somewhere along the way, I'd lost my sister. After the ruling, people assumed things would go back to normal. They don't tell you that part, how everyone expects closure to look neat like a ribbon tied on a box, as if justice automatically repairs what was broken, as if truth is enough to stitch a family back together. It wasn't. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No more calls from Elaine, no angry messages, no late-night voicemails filled with blame or tears. Just nothing. An absence so complete it felt intentional. I told myself I should be relieved. Instead, I felt like I was walking around with a missing limb. At work, word spread in the soft, careful way gossip does when it knows it shouldn't exist. A coworker brought me coffee one morning without saying why. Another squeezed my shoulder in the break room and said, "You're strong." I nodded because strength was the story people needed to tell themselves. Inside, I was tired in a way I'd never been before. One evening, about a month after the case ended, I came home to find a box on my porch. No return address, just my name, written in Elaine's familiar handwriting. I carried it inside and set it on the dining table. For a long time, I didn't open it. I made tea instead, chamomile. The steam fogged my glasses. My hands shook when I finally lifted the lid. Inside were old things, photos, letters, a watch that had belonged to our father. I picked it up, turning it over in my palm. I remembered him wearing it to church, the leather strap cracked from years of use. At the bottom of the box was an envelope. I recognized the paper immediately. Dad's stationery, cream-colored, thick, my name written in his careful script. I sat down hard in the chair. The letter was dated years before he died. "My dear girl," it began. I read it slowly, each word landing like a weight and a balm at the same time. He wrote about love, about fear, about how he worried Elaine carried too much on her shoulders, how he worried I carried things quietly and alone. He admitted he'd made the trust without explaining it to me because he didn't want money to change how I saw myself. He believed I would have refused it out of pride. He never imagined Elaine would use it the way she did. "I trusted her," he wrote. "I trusted both of you. If you're reading this, it means something went wrong. I'm sorry." I pressed the letter to my chest and cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before. Not the careful tears I'd shed in private, but deep, shaking sobs that left me gasping. Elaine had included a note of her own. It was short. "I don't expect forgiveness," she wrote. "I just couldn't keep these anymore." I sat there long after the tea went cold, surrounded by pieces of a life that no longer existed in the way I remembered it. The anger I'd carried for months softened into something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Understanding didn't erase what she'd done, it didn't bring back the money or the years of trust, but it made room for the truth that we were both shaped by the same man, the same loss, in very different ways. I started therapy shortly after that. It wasn't something I'd ever considered before. I'd always believed in handling things on my own, but there were too many knots inside me now, too many questions I couldn't answer by myself. In those sessions, I learned how much of my life had been built around being the easy one, the dependable one, the sister who didn't need as much. I learned how that role had made it easier for others to overlook me and for me to overlook myself. Slowly, I began to change small things. I replaced the broken step on the porch. I painted the living room a warmer color. I took a week off work and went nowhere just to see what it felt like to rest without guilt. People asked if I missed Elaine. I told them the truth, every day. But missing her didn't mean I could pretend nothing had happened. We spoke once more, a year later. A brief call, polite, careful. She sounded older. So did I. "I'm glad you're okay," she said. "I'm glad you're trying," I replied. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was something. The house remained mine, safe, solid, a place I'd fought for in ways I never imagined. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on the porch and listen to the quiet. I think about inheritance, not just money, but habits, expectations, silence, the things we pass down without realizing it. And I ask myself what I want to leave behind. The first holiday after everything happened was the hardest. Thanksgiving had always been Elaine's domain. She liked the big table, the matching napkins, the way people admired her cooking even when half of it came from catering trays. For years, I'd shown up early to help, chopping vegetables while she directed traffic, both of us playing our roles so well we forgot they were roles at all. That year, there was no invitation. I bought a small turkey anyway. Old habits die slowly. I roasted it alone, the smell filling the house with a comfort that felt almost cruel. I ate at the kitchen table instead of the dining room, the silence stretching wide and heavy. But something unexpected happened in that quiet. I realized I could breathe. No performance, no comparison, no unspoken hierarchy, just me, a plate of food, and the soft ticking of the clock. In the weeks that followed, I noticed how people treated me differently now that the truth was public, not with pity, at least not always, but with a kind of cautious respect, as if surviving something ugly had granted me a new shape. At work, I was offered a promotion, a small one, more responsibility, a modest raise. I almost said no out of habit, then stopped myself. "Yes," I said. My voice didn't shake. I started saying yes to other things too. Lunch with coworkers, a weekend workshop I'd always told myself was impractical. I began to feel my world expanding inch by inch. Elaine's consequences unfolded more quietly. Her name, once spoken with admiration, became something people lowered their voices around. Mutual friends stopped calling. Invitations dried up. She moved out of state, I heard, downsizing into a small apartment far from the lake she'd once owned. I didn't celebrate her losses. I didn't need to. Life had a way of balancing itself without my help. One afternoon, nearly 2 years after that dinner, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Elaine. "I'm not calling to ask for anything," she said before I could speak. "I just wanted you to know I think about you." I closed my eyes. "I think about you too." There was a pause. "I was wrong," she said. "About the money. About you." "I know," I replied. That was all. No apologies, no grand reconciliation, just a small, honest moment between two people who shared a history too complicated to fix in a single conversation. After we hung up, I sat in the living room and looked around, the new paint, the fixed step, the watch from my father's box now resting on the mantel. I thought about how close I'd come to losing this place, how easily the story could have ended differently if I'd stayed silent, if I'd decided family loyalty mattered more than truth. There's a kind of courage that doesn't look like bravery. It looks like paperwork, like uncomfortable conversations, like standing alone in a courtroom while your sister avoids your eyes. It's not glamorous, but it's real. I began volunteering at a local legal clinic, helping people navigate paperwork that once terrified me. I couldn't fix everything for them, but I could sit beside them and explain the words. I could tell them they weren't stupid for not knowing that silence isn't the same as consent. Sometimes, late in the afternoon, I catch my reflection in the clinic's glass doors. I look older than I did before all this started. Not worn, just clearer, like someone who finally understands the shape of her own life. The trust fund is gone. I'll never see that money. But I kept something else. My home, my name, my sense of self. And maybe that's what my father wanted all along, even if he went about it the wrong way. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in small, almost forgettable moments. Standing in the grocery store and choosing the good olive oil without checking the price twice. Waking up on a Saturday without dread sitting on my chest. Laughing at something on television and realizing the sound surprised me. I stopped measuring my life against Elaine's shadow. That was the quietest victory of all. There were still days when grief ambushed me. I'd open a drawer and find one of Dad's old receipts tucked inside a book. I'd hear a song he loved while driving and have to pull over until the tightness in my throat eased. Loss doesn't leave when you ask it to. It learns to coexist. I framed his letter and placed it in the hallway where the light catches it in the afternoon. Not as an altar, not as a reminder of mistakes, but as proof that love can be complicated and still be real. People sometimes asked if I regretted taking my sister to court. I thought about that question carefully before answering. No, I said, but I regret that it was necessary. There's a difference. One spring morning, I planted flowers along the front of the house. Nothing extravagant, just marigolds and lavender. As I pressed the soil around the roots, I realized how symbolic the act felt, choosing what I wanted to grow right here in the place I'd almost lost. A neighbor stopped by and said the house looked brighter. It feels brighter, I told her. And it did. I stopped apologizing for my boundaries, stopped explaining myself to people who weren't entitled to explanations. That alone felt like a new language I was still learning to speak. As for Elaine, our relationship settled into something quiet and distant, a holiday text, a birthday call every other year. We didn't rehash the past, we didn't pretend it hadn't happened, we simply acknowledged each other's existence from afar. Some people call that cold. I call it honest. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sky soften into dusk, I thought about that dinner, the clink of her wine glass, the casual cruelty of her smile, the way one sentence unraveled everything I believed about my family. If I could go back, I wouldn't change that moment, because it forced me to choose myself. Money has a way of revealing truths people hide even from themselves. It didn't turn my sister into someone she wasn't. It gave her the opportunity to act on who she already was. And it gave me the chance to see myself clearly, without the stories I'd been telling to stay comfortable. I learned that silence can be inherited just like debt, that being easy can cost you more than being difficult ever will, that love without honesty is just another kind of abandonment. And I learned something else, too, that dignity isn't loud. It doesn't shout or gloat or demand applause. It sits quietly, waiting for you to choose it, especially when choosing it means disappointing someone you love. The trust fund was never really mine, not in the way people think, but the life I built after losing it, that is. People still ask me about the trust fund. Not directly, not always with words. Sometimes it's a look, curious, cautious, like they're measuring how much of the story I'm willing to give away. Other times it comes dressed as advice. You're strong, they say. You handled that with grace. I don't know if I could have done what you did. I nod. I thank them, and later, when I'm alone, I sit with the truth they don't see. Strength didn't come naturally to me. Grace didn't arrive fully formed. They were choices, slow ones, painful ones, the kind you make when every option hurts, but some hurt less than others. There are nights now when I sit at my kitchen table, the same one where I once spread out legal papers and bank statements, and I think about how easily my life could have gone another way, how close I came to losing my home because I trusted silence more than questions, how many years I lived believing that wanting less made me better. It didn't. It just made me easier to overlook. I used to believe love meant not rocking the boat, that family meant swallowing discomfort for the sake of peace, that if I just stayed kind enough, patient enough, loyal enough, everything would work itself out. But love without boundaries is not love, it's permission, and peace that requires you to disappear is not peace at all. I wish my father had told me about the trust fund. I wish he'd trusted me with the truth instead of trying to protect me from it. But I also understand now that parents are just people who make decisions with the information and fear they have at the time. I've stopped asking why he did it. I've started asking what I'll do differently. Because inheritance isn't just about money. It's about what we teach people to expect from us. It's about what we normalize. It's about the silence we pass down and call tradition. I inherited my father's caution. My sister inherited his ambition. Neither of those things were wrong. What broke us was the belief that only one of us deserved more. If you're listening to my story and feeling something twist inside you, let me say this gently. Listen to that feeling. Don't rush to bury it under politeness or excuses or family loyalty. Pay attention to the quiet discomfort. It's often the first honest thing your body tells you. Ask the questions you're afraid will make things awkward. Read the fine print. Protect what is yours even if doing so makes someone angry. Especially then, because the people who benefit from your silence will always call you dramatic the moment you speak. I didn't walk away from this story richer in the way people usually mean. There was no surprise check, no restored fortune, no perfect reconciliation. But I walked away with my home, with my name intact, with the knowledge that I can survive betrayal without becoming bitter. And that matters more than any trust fund ever could. Now, when I sit on my porch in the evenings, I watch the light fade across the street, and I think about how life asks us again and again to decide who we are when no one is applauding, when the choice costs us something, when doing the right thing feels lonely. That's where character lives, in the quiet, in the aftermath. So I'll leave you with this question, the one I had to answer for myself. If someone you loved took advantage of your silence, would you finally speak up, or would you keep paying the price to keep the peace? If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of your own family, your own unasked questions, I hope you'll share your thoughts below. You're not alone in this. We learn from each other's courage. And if you're listening from a place where you're still unsure, still afraid, still deciding, take your time. Just don't disappear. Thank you for sitting with me. And until next time, take care of yourself, the way no one else ever quite did. There's something no one tells you about stories like mine. After the dust settles, after the court dates and the paperwork and the quiet victories, life doesn't suddenly become loud and triumphant. It becomes softer, quieter, almost ordinary again. And that ordinariness can feel unsettling when you've lived for so long in survival mode. For a while, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. Every unfamiliar envelope in the mail made my chest tighten. Every unexpected phone call felt like it might carry bad news. Trauma doesn't leave just because justice shows up. It lingers, whispering, "Be careful," even when you're finally safe. I had to relearn how to live without bracing myself. One afternoon, I found myself standing in the hallway, staring at my father's letter on the wall. The sunlight hit it just right, making the ink glow faintly. I read it again, slower this time, not searching for answers, but for understanding. I realized something then that I hadn't allowed myself to before. My father's greatest mistake wasn't the trust fund, it was secrecy. He thought silence would protect me. He thought money hidden away would make up for the sacrifices he saw me making. He thought love meant managing outcomes instead of telling the truth. And my sister learned from that same silence that rules were flexible, that boundaries could be bent if the reason felt justified enough. Silence shaped us both. That's the part of the inheritance no one talks about. I started writing letters I never sent. One to my father, telling him I forgave him, not because the damage didn't matter, but because carrying resentment toward a dead man was only hurting me. One to Elaine, where I said all the things I'd learned not to say growing up, that I mattered, that I wasn't low maintenance, that my quiet wasn't consent. I didn't mail it, but writing it changed something in me. I stopped shrinking my needs to fit other people's comfort. I stopped assuming that being loved meant being chosen last. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, my life grew wider. I made new friends, people who met me as I was, not as someone's sister or someone's shadow, people who didn't expect me to carry everything alone. I learned that asking for help isn't weakness, it's participation. On the anniversary of the court ruling, I did something symbolic. I took the old metal file box, the one labeled important, and cleaned it out. I kept what I needed, I shredded what I didn't. Then I relabeled it, My Life. That box used to hold proof. Now it holds intention. Sometimes I imagine an alternate version of myself, the one who never asked the question, never made the call, never challenged the lie because it felt easier to stay quiet. I see her slowly losing her home, blaming herself, telling people it was just bad luck. That version of me doesn't get this piece. And that's why I share this story. Not because it's dramatic, not because it's neat, but because somewhere out there is someone like I was, someone who suspects something isn't right, but has been taught their whole life not to make waves. Let me say this as clearly and gently as I can. You are not wrong for wanting clarity. You are not greedy for protecting what's yours. You are not disloyal for telling the truth. Family doesn't get a free pass to harm you just because they share your blood. Love that requires your silence will always cost you more than you think. If I could sit across from you right now, I wouldn't tell you to be brave. Bravery is too big, too intimidating when you're already tired. I'd tell you this instead. Be honest, even if your voice shakes. Be curious, even when answers scare you. Be loyal to yourself first. Because when everything else is stripped away, that loyalty is what carries you through the aftermath. I didn't end up rich, but I ended up whole. And that, after everything, is the truest inheritance I could have claimed. There is a quiet moment that comes after everything has been said, after the explanations, after the apologies that came too late or never came at all, after the world stops watching and moves on to the next story. That's where I live now. Not in anger, not in triumph, just in awareness. Some mornings, I wake up before the sun rises. I sit at the kitchen table with a mug warming my hands, listening to the house breathe around me. The refrigerator hums. The floorboard near the hallway creaks the way it always has. These sounds used to mean stability. Then they meant fear. Now they mean survival. I stayed. There were moments during the worst of it when leaving would have been easier. Selling the house, starting fresh somewhere no one knew my name or my story, letting the past belong to the past. But I didn't want a life built on retreat, so I stayed, and I learned how to live here again. I learned that healing isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with confidence or certainty. Sometimes it looks like folding laundry without crying. Sometimes it's laughing at a memory without immediately correcting yourself for it. Sometimes it's allowing joy without waiting for punishment to follow. For a long time, I believed being the good one meant being silent, agreeable, flexible. I thought love was something you earned by asking for less. But love that asks you to disappear is not love. It's convenience. And I was convenient for a very long time. When my sister asked me if I was enjoying my trust fund, she thought she was teasing. She thought she was exposing a secret I'd been quietly benefiting from. She had no idea she was handing me a key, not to money, to truth. That question forced me to look at my life with open eyes, to ask myself why I always assumed scarcity was my role, why I believed other people's needs naturally outranked my own, why I trusted silence more than honesty. I don't hate my sister. That surprises people. Hatred would be simpler, cleaner, easier to explain. But hatred keeps you tied to the person who hurt you long after they've moved on. What I feel instead is distance. And distance, I've learned, can be a form of love, especially when closeness only ever required your sacrifice. I think my sister loved me in the only way she knew how. I think she convinced herself she deserved more because the world expected more of her. I think she told herself I was fine because I always seemed to be. That's the danger of appearing strong. People stop checking. So now, I let myself be seen, not dramatically, not constantly, but honestly. I say when I'm tired, I say when something hurts, I say when something matters to me. And if that makes someone uncomfortable, I remind myself that discomfort is not the same as harm. I spent too many years confusing the two. If you're listening to this and thinking about your own family, your own quiet role, your own unasked questions, please hear me when I say this. You don't owe anyone your silence. Not your parents, not your siblings, not the people who benefit most from you staying small. You are allowed to ask what was promised to you. You are allowed to protect what you've built. You are allowed to take up space without apologizing for it. And if the cost of truth is distance, sometimes that distance is what saves you. I didn't get the trust fund, but I gained something far more valuable than money. I gained clarity. I know who I am when tested. I know I can survive betrayal without becoming cruel. I know I can choose myself without losing my soul. And that knowledge sits with me now, steady and unshakable. So when people ask how I'm doing these days, I smile and tell them the truth. I'm at peace. Not because everything worked out perfectly, not because everyone learned their lesson, but because I finally stopped betraying myself to keep others comfortable. And if you're standing at the edge of a truth you're afraid to face, wondering whether speaking up is worth the fallout, let me leave you with this final thought. Silence feels safe until it costs you your home, your identity, or your peace. Choose yourself before the price gets any higher. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sitting with my story. And if this reflection stirred something in you, hold on to that feeling. It might be the beginning of your own quiet turning point.